Hello and welcome to Varn Blog. And today it's time for us to face up to the fact that in the shock of recognition that things like democratic socialism is not really a break with contemporary progressivism, many of us think that we can roll back to some other winner in the past. And I understand the impulse. No one wants to be attached to the most recent loser. They'd rather be attached to dead losers because often dead losers can't tell you how they lost or why what you're doing is irrelevant to them, or even what really happened, as they are already rendered archetypical and mythical to many of you. And it comes up every day when I talk to people about their ideologies, and often they don't know much about the ideologies they profess. Like so many things, people are trying these ideological traditions on as Twitter avatars and as Instagram images to see where they fit a certain radical chic. If you're not in a Trotskyist organization, I don't care about your personal faith. You're not a Trotskyist. If you're not in a Maoist organization, I don't care about your personal faith. You're not a Maoist. And if you're not in a Marxist-Leninist organization, I don't care about your personal faith. You're not a Marxist-Leninist. Sure, you might profess some inchoate version of those beliefs or some attachment to the aesthetic. After all, most of what I see on this site here, YouTube, and also on Twitter is mostly about aesthetics and totally incoherent understandings of what the actual positions of these things were, and usually just mere inversions of pathetically ahistorical anti-communism leading to an ahistorical anti-communism. Inverting something doesn't make it true or right or interesting. In fact, it just kind of makes you pathetic, because you're still letting the thing that you're responding to dominate your own thought and your own ideological life. If these things were living traditions that still had living states and stuff attached to them, you would not be trying to freeze them in the moment which fits your personal aesthetic. The fact that you can freeze them indicates that they are already in the dustbin of history. And bringing back some pathetic rhetoric from the 1920s to win an argument is not going to reverse that. A long time ago, when I was more doing religious studies, something that I used to do a lot more of, I would always talk about how people don't really have the epistemology of ancient pagans when they're neo-pagans. They don't, and even pagan reconstructionists or polytheistic reconstructionists who are strictly going back through the available evidence cannot actually access that worldview. All right. There's no way that you're going to abandon germ theory and miasma. Most people don't. Most Christians don't either. I'm not just picking on neo-pagans here. Similarly, a lot of people who claim X ideology but completely miss the conditions of which it existed. What does the dictatorship of the proletariat and peasant mean to you in a country where there is no fucking peasants? Agriculture has long been proletarianized. There's not even sharecroppers and other things that look like feudal remnants left. Commodities traded on the market, even in rents. Do you think your aesthetic devotion to something in the past reverses the fact that you don't live in that context? And no, being anti these people also doesn't help. Trying to relive debates from 1914 or 1921 or 1935 are useful only as counterfactuals for analysis to try to figure out what you would need to build today. But to relitigate them over and over and over again betrays a dead tradition. Understanding the history of the left is not so you can pick your favorite parts of it and LARP it into oblivion. Yes, we all LARP until we don't. Absolutely true. Even Marx said it, although not in those words, obviously. A whole passage of the Brumaire is dedicated to this very idea that we always pretend to wear the visions of the most revolutionary past until we learn what the present actually is. You take off the habit and you get John Locke. You take off the banners of the Roman Republic and its praetorian and plebeians, tribunes, and you get the Jacobins. But you have to see this in what you LARP today. And so much as the left is not a church, it also should not be a historical reenactment society. One that you even do under the safety of internet. Constantly adjudicating the moral valences of the particular leadership is often a way to not deal with the larger historical movements at hand. But if you like having insults from 1925, be my guest. Continue. Go ahead. Pretend it's meaningful. I'm going to end this rant with a long quote from Engels's Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. Quote, but the new order of things, rational enough as compared with earlier conditions, turned out to be by no means absolutely rational. The state based upon reason completely collapsed. Rousseau's social contract had found in its realization in the Reign of Terror, from which the bourgeoisie, who had lost their confidence in their own political capacity, had taken refuge first in the corruption of the Directorate and finally under the wing of Napoleonic despotism. The promised eternal peace was turned into endless war of conquest. The society based upon reason had fared no better. The antagonism between rich and poor, instead of dissolving into general prosperity, had become intensified by the removal of the guild and other privileges, which had to some extent bridged it over, and by the removal of the charitable institutions of the church. The freedom of property from feudal fetters, now veritably accomplished, turned out to be, for small capitalists and small proprietors, the freedom to sell their small property, crushed under the overmassing competition by the large capitalists and landlords. To the great lords, and thus, as far as the small capitalists and peasant proprietors were concerned, became freedom from property. The development of industry under capitalistic basis made poverty and misery of the working masses conditions of existence of society. Cash payments became more and more, in Carlyle's phrase, see Thomas Carlyle's Past and Present London, 1843, the sole nexus between man and man. The number of crimes increased from year to year, and formerly feudal vices had openly stalked in broad daylight. Though not eradicated, they were now at any rate thrust into the background. Their stead, the bourgeois vices, hitherto practiced in secret, began to blossom all the more luxuriantly. Trade became greater and greater extent cheating. The fraternity of the revolutionary motto was realized in the chicanery and rivalries of the battle of competition. Oppression by force was replaced by corruption. The sword as the first social lever by gold. The right of the first knight was transferred from the feudal lords to the bourgeois manufacturers. Prostitution increased to an extent never before heard of. Asterisk. I've seen it estimated that to be up between 40% of the female population of London was engaged in some form of prostitution. I don't know how we know this. I've just seen it asserted before. Back to the text. Marriage itself remained as before, the legally recognized form. the official cloak of prostitution, and moreover was supplemented by rich crops of adultery, of which Engels knows a good bit. Anyway, in a word, compared with the splendid promises of the philosophers, the social and political institutions born of the triumph of reason were bitterly disappointing caricatures. And all that was wanting was the men to formulate this disappointment, and they came with the turn of the century. In 1802, Saint-Simon's Geneva Letters appeared. In 1803, appeared Fourier's first work. And although the groundwork of his theory dated from 1799, on January 1st, 1800, Robert Owen undertook the direction of new Lanark. At this time, however, the capitalist mode of production, and with it the antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, was still very incompletely developed. Modern industry had just arisen in England, was still unknown in France. But modern industry develops, on one hand, the conflicts which made absolutely necessary revolution in the mode of production, and doing so, and doing away with the capitalistic character, conflicts not only between the classes begotten of it, but also between the very productive forces and forms of exchange created by it. Yet, on the other hand, it develops in these very gigantic productive forces the means of ending these conflicts. And if, therefore, by the year 1800, the conflicts arising from the new social order were only beginning to take shape, this holds more fully to the meaning of the ending of them. The have-nothing masses of Paris during the Reign of Terror were able for a moment to gain the mastery, and thus to lead the bourgeois revolution to carry in spite of the bourgeoisie themselves. But in doing so, they only proved how impossible it was for their domination to last under the conditions then obtaining. The proletariat, which then for the first time evolved itself from the have-nothing masses as a nucleus of a new class, and yet quite incapable of independent political action, appeared as an oppressed, suffering order to whom its incapacity to help itself could at best be brought from without or down from above. This historical situation also dominated the founders of socialism. To the crude conditions of capitalistic production and the crude class conditions corresponded crude theories. The solution of the social problem, which as of yet lay hidden in underdeveloped economic conditions, the utopians attempted to evolve out of the human brain. Society presented nothing but wrongs. To remove them was the task of reason. But it was necessary then to discover a new and more perfect system of social order, and to oppose this upon society from without by propaganda, and whenever possible, by example of model experiments. These new social systems were foredoomed as utopian. The more completely they worked out in detail, the more they could not avoid drifting into pure fantasies. These facts once established, we need not dwell on a moment longer than upon the side of the question now wholly belonging to the past. We can leave it to a literary small fry to solemnly quiver over these fantasies, which only today make us smile, and to crow over the superiority of our own bald reasoning as compared to such insanity. But for ourselves, we delight in the stupendously grand thoughts and germs of thoughts that everywhere break out through their fantastic covering, and to which these Philistines are blind. There's a lot in that quote. But when you're role modeling the past, you are stuck in it. You are stuck in its modes and what was not yet uncovered. And you render a historical movement, a historical socialist movement, utopian in making a negative utopia of a prior moment. Pick the year 1952, 1936, 1927, 1922, 1917, 1914. Which year do you want to go back to? Therein lies your utopia. The most perverse utopia. The utopia of past conditions. Bury your ideological dead and grow up. Like and subscribe, hit the bell. Have a good day.